there was a woman that contacted me, and she was telling a story about her mother. So, and her mother was from Mexico. They were both from Mexico, but her mother didn't speak English. So it was through translation that her mother talked to me and gave me this story about when she was young and her brother. She had several siblings, but one brother that was really close in age to him. And they used to fight all the time. And one day they were even at school and were fighting, and got caught by the teacher, and they had to stay after school, and they were walking home after school along the dirt road to their farm, and her brother and her had another fight, and he ran off. And so she's walking home, and all of a sudden she gets hit by a dirt clod. And so she's convinced her brother is hiding in the brush, throwing dirt clods at her. So she rushes into the brush to find this little man in this clearing with a dirt clod in his hand. And he says, leave your brother alone. He's my person. You leave him alone. Stop being mean. And runs off. And she freaks out and runs home, tells her mother, and her mother explains to her that is a duende, and that apparently that duende felt some sort of loyalty to her brother. And so her brother and her agreed not to fight anymore. Her mother made her make some cookies and milk to leave out for the duende, and a note that said, I won't fight. We're not going to fight anymore. I will, I'll be nicer to my brother. And they left it out by the shed. And so it was interesting to learn that kind of custom and culture. But she was really shocked about it. He was a little guy, black hair and beard, and kind of, handmade clothes. And apparently he was very attached to her brother. And so she remembers it very vividly when she was little, this happening. So that one I thought was pretty cool too, especially the fact that, her parents explained to her what in their culture is a duende, and how they can attach to somebody or a place, and to be respectful. And it was just kind of a cool story.
I always find it fascinating with the little people stuff that they seem to bounce back and forth. And even one particular type of little person, they always have this back and forth that sometimes they can be malevolent and other times they can be benevolent. Like, it's such a weird back and forth. And this whole attachment idea, as far as like little people go too, I've actually exploring with Phil. He's been doing a bunch of investigations in the Huckamuck Swamp, referring to like Pukwudgies, and he was basically doing like a line of questioning through a spirit box, and he was asking other researchers, investigators, like what questions they would ask it. And the one that I threw in was, are Pukwudgies able to attach themselves to people? Because at least from his experiences, he'd moved to like totally different swamps and do investigations there, and he'd seemed to have like the same interaction, and then the whole topic of Pukwudgie would come up constantly. So I'm glad that you brought that one up, because then that is another attachment that I can throw back at him as far as these things actually having that ability, which kind of links into like the more spiritual side of them, I guess, or maybe they're
Right.
just interested in some person in particular for whatever reason they decide to be. But hopefully, if they attach themselves to you, is for more of a protective thing than it is just because you're fun to mess with.
Right. And either one could probably happen. You don't know. Maybe it's one of those things too, where you're walking home and you find that stray kitten and it attaches to you or something. And maybe they think of us as just really cute things, and they're like, "Oh, that's mine. I'm going to take care of that." Who knows? But it's definitely could be. So that's pretty cool, though. Yeah, and I love those stories. They're some of my favorites. When I interview people and I'm able to get those stories, it's always exciting to get those stories, because, like I said, they're a little bit more rare than some of the others, for sure.
See, and I'm just asking out of curiosity here. It seems like most of the Fey lore, when people associate fairies, they think about Europe. But I think that there's just as much in America, but under a totally different name. And obviously, we have all these little people, which should kind of relate to like the gnomes and like goblins and things like that, as far as like Fey goes for Europe. But you talk about like the fairies, for example. And I know some people call them fairy lights, but the orbs that people see in the woods, I've been kind of tossing around the idea lately because I've heard people that are connected with Sasquatch who are into the whole interdimensional Sasquatch concept, and they say it's like this idea where they compress themselves into something so that they can travel through parallel dimensions. So they need to be a compressed version. But I've kind of wondered if those are the fairies of America, and we have again this whole entire same concept of Fey lore. It's just under a totally different name, and yet the little people would be associated with the gnomes and everything, and then these lights, the orbs, are actually our version of the fairies.
Right.
Because a lot of the time, the European stuff, when you dig into it, everybody kind of has this idea of what the fairies look like as far as like Tinkerbell. But when you start digging into the lore, there are never these cute little creatures that are known for being like tricksters, essentially. A lot of the times they were seen as like orbs of light, and if you actually saw them up close, they were more like just to relate back to another concept because you're already talking about Harry Potter, but those little blue imp things that
Oh,
were
right.
like biting in the first I think it was like the first or second movie, but
Yeah.
they're more described more like that than these cute little Tinkerbell fairies.
Yeah, exactly. They're some of them are really nasty little creatures, and they talk about their teeth, and um, yeah, it's much more like that than like you say Tinkerbell or something of that nature. So, and it's funny because here in where I live in northern Utah, there's a canyon. It's called Logan Canyon. It's right off of Utah State University, and it's amazing how many people I've interviewed who have seen orbs up there. And I'm not talking about just like little orbs either. Some of them are the size of basketballs, that um, bright, glowing orbs that go through the trees. And even a gentleman that I interviewed, who I can, so many stories. I don't remember which books or what these are in, but he was fishing along the river in the rain and saw this huge orb that looked like lightning. And I would have even thought it was a ball lightning, but it seemed to have an intelligence to it. And when it recognized him, it came towards him, and then ended up just shooting off straight into the air. But there's an awful lot of um, large orb lights that are found in that canyon, and so it makes you wonder, if it is attached to Sasquatch, or if it's attached to the Fae or ghosts, or a combination of all of those things. It's hard to tell, but it's definitely something that's very prevalent there.